I always enjoy talking with Michael Tsarion, and this was perhaps my favorite conversation yet. Knowing of Michael's deep knowledge of the Druidic culture, I asked him if we could switch topics at the last moment and speak to the reemergence of the feminine. He kindly obliged, and we took a deep look at the suppression of women throughout history and the need for the feminine to come to the forefront again for the sake of humanity. Michael, since we last talked, I found it rather interesting in that a lot of the women, a lot of them are very outspoken, some of them are more or less well-known in the alternative media, including friends of mine and myself, are having this experience that something of a very deep and moving nature seems to be surfacing, and it's taking the shape of a type of anger. And I'm realizing it's from a collective connection to a larger consciousness, a memory, if you will. Not that there's not every good reason for women to have some of this bubbling to the surface, but there's been in your work, a concerted effort to make sure that women in particular stay particularly asleep. Can you talk to us just a little bit about, even from an occultist point of view, and some of what goes on in the darkest reaches that most of us don't have awareness of?
Well, women have been suppressed in hundreds of ways for years, and that suppression is not just a physical oppression. From outside, it's the implanting of inferior idioms within the consciousness of the female. It also is a misrepresentation of what is femininity in general. We may not even have a clear understanding of what femininity and masculinity are, because a lot of people don't realize there's a huge difference between what is male and female and masculine and feminine, and will use those terms interchangeably, which is okay on the street level, but when you're trying to be more technical about it, you get into all sorts of problems. And this is actually a huge thing. I hope that people will think about it. Because, in fact, what you're seeing in the world today are basically people who have murdered their own femininity and masculinity, make up for that fact by the cosmetic industry, who provides simulacras, false personas of masculine and femininity as they have contrived it. People conform to those models, and this is what we have now walking about in society. So very few people today have a sense of their own masculinity and femininity. You're speaking specifically about women, and that's where I would come in, is that women today have lost all sense of what it is to be feminine. Because in order to even be able to coexist in the world, gain success, they've had to become masculinized. It's been demanded. It may be unspoken, meaning that a person's parents may not sit down and give this as a lecture to the average teenage girl. But society is permeated with that unless you suit up like a guy, unless you cosmetize yourself according to certain models that they put on television, unless you completely have beaten yourself up about your looks, about your complexion, about your height, about your level of intelligence, about your applicability, your intelligence level, your levels of approval. And so now you have girls who are entirely fixated on winning that approval. But of course what happens in society is we often may want something, we may have expectations, we may not get it. So what happens to these adolescents is that they then jump through all these hoops, force their parents to buy them things, conform to what their peer groups are talking about, microanalyze all the media out there in order to fit these preposterous stereotypes, and then not get the very approval from a psychopathic, broken society that was the promissory note.
But isn't it designed to make sure that that approval is never given?
Yes, it is, and that is the crux of then where the neurosis comes in, because when we don't get the approval that we falsely need, I mean, my work ultimately works on why we would even need that approval, but that's another area. Since you do need it, since your whole psychology is geared towards receiving it, you will do two things. One, you will do anything, including self-murder, to get it. You will become a completely attuned, acculturated person, because you feel that I will get it if I jump through these hoops, if I look like the latest model, if my speech is, the way that I speak is born from television lingo, if I mimic, and if I conform. And the other thing is then when you find out that you're not really getting the approval, then comes the inevitable neuroses. And it's at this point, when the neurosis sets in, that Big Brother is watching. This is what Big Brother's hoping for. He's not really empowered while you're going through the early stages. He is empowered when you start becoming neurotic, because the neurotic individual is far more susceptible to control.
Yes.
This affects women more than men, because men historically have been able to outroject or project their anger, because you were talking about anger, and this is all satellite to these emotions. Men have been able to bounce a basketball, kick a football around, have a bar fight, go hunting, go off to war if necessary, kill entire peoples and all the rest of it in order to exorcise and expatiate all of this pent-up emotion and anger and so on. The difference is that women have not been allowed to do that historically. They introject. Of course, that now the introjection plays in yet to another Leviathan, which is the big pharma. Because when you introject anger, you have skin breakouts, you have bad eyesight, you will have a whole cocktail of other, mostly biological issues, including anorexia, by the way, which is self-hatred expressed outwardly, or bulimia, and all the other cocktail.
It's a slow suicide of sorts.
Well, it is, ultimately. Yes. And then what happens is, Big Brother's watching because he knows that most women, up until now, which brings us to your point, have always been introjecting. But as Freud and Jung always said, you can only repress to a certain extent. You can only introject to a certain extent until the sump gets completely full. Then it's going to explode outwardly, which I don't believe is entirely a bad thing, because of all pathologies, one is just replacing the other, or one is slightly less bad than the other. You see, it's all a matter of scale. The thing is, though, that if women, as you're saying, are starting to get either over, they become, the introjection is reaching its end.
Yes.
There is only one avenue left, and that is to start projecting it. I'm in favor of all emotions being accepted, and being, because I have a very healthy, I advocate a healthy relationship with what are mistakenly called darker emotions. They're only darker because you won't look at them. You won't shine the light of consciousness onto it. Now, there's a problem, because if women don't know how to healthily project their anger and these fantastic emotions, which they don't, which is critical, into art, into aesthetics, into sport, into something that's building them up, right? Bringing them in touch with their own creativity. Then, of course, they will, another form of neurosis, another form of pathology will be created, in which it might be some dysfunctionally projected. This has implications for children. This has implications for, just driving down the freeway, more road rage, or, it has sociological implications. But then we have to look at is, why is the sea change happening? There's deeper questions in all of this. It's very good. I always advocate in my work, you shouldn't be okay with injustice. You shouldn't be smiling depressed. If you see things that are broken and corrupt, you should rebel against it. So if that's what's happening, and there is this outpouring of emotion because people are now sick of the cosmetics, the girls are waking up to realize, I'm not going to conform, it's no good, I want to be me. Who am I?